Everything took too long a time. He got to the hospital, and I saw him do a big injection of something right into his heart.
At 79, Linda Lee Cadwell has finally broken her silence, revealing what many had long suspected about Bruce Lee. For decades, the world has known Bruce as a martial arts legend, a man whose speed, philosophy, and presence reshaped Hollywood and global cinema. But behind the fame, there was another story, one that is filled with struggle, prejudice, and a mystery that has never truly been solved. For years, Linda has defended Bruce's legacy, pushing back against rumors and speculation. But now she's saying something different. She speaks of the battles Bruce faced, not just in the ring or on screen, but against a system that resisted him for being Chinese. And then, there's his death. Was it really an accident, or was there something more? Linda's words suggest a truth long hidden that could change everything we thought we knew about Bruce Lee. The woman behind the legend. For years, Linda Lee has been the quiet force behind Bruce Lee's legacy, keeping his memory alive while carefully choosing what to reveal. But now, at 79, she is finally speaking up in a way that has caught everyone's attention. Her words are different this time. They don't just celebrate Bruce's life, they confirm something many had suspected all along. But how exactly did their love story begin? What memories has she treasured, but never shared? And how did her love story with the charismatic martial arts icon begin? Linda Lee Cadwell met Bruce Lee in 1963 when she was just a college student. He was a young martial arts instructor who was full of energy and ideas that would later shake the world. Their love story seemed almost unreal. She was a white American woman and he was a Chinese man. Yet they defied the odds in a time when mixed marriages were still frowned upon. But despite the struggles, Linda stood by Bruce through it all. She watched him rise from a small-time instructor in Seattle to a global superstar. And then, just when it seemed like the world was finally ready to embrace him, he was gone. Bruce Lee's death in 1973 was a shock. He was just 32 years old and was seemingly at the peak of his strength. The official cause of his death was cerebral edema, the swelling of the brain. But from the very beginning, the explanation didn't sit right with people. How could a man known for his physical perfection suddenly collapse and die? Over the years, theories began to spread. Some believed he had been poisoned. Others claimed he was targeted by people who didn't want him to succeed. And then there was the belief that his death wasn't random at all, that Bruce had made enemies and they had found a way to silence him. For decades, Linda dismissed these rumors. She stood by the medical reports and insisted that Bruce's death was a tragic accident. But now, at 79, her tone has changed. Linda Lee has finally spoken up and her words hint at something deeper, something she never admitted before. And that's not all. Linda has also revealed another painful truth. She was scared for their son, Brandon Lee. She feared that whatever happened to Bruce could happen to him too. And tragically, it did.
To lose a child, you never, of course, expect that your child will go before you do.
In 1993, exactly 20 years after Bruce's death, Brandon was killed in a freak accident while filming The Crow. A prop gun, which was supposed to fire blanks, shot a real bullet. Just like his father, Brandon died young, leaving behind more questions than answers. The similarities between their deaths only fueled suspicions. Was it really just bad luck? Or was there something darker at play? Linda never spoke much about these fears before. Instead, she stayed strong, protecting Bruce's name and shielding Brandon's memory from wild speculation. But now she is finally opening up. Her latest words don't just revisit Bruce's legacy. They hint at a truth that has remained hidden for decades. Now it is becoming clear that Bruce Lee was not just a fighter or just a movie star, but a man caught in a much bigger mystery. Bruce Lee's private world and the prejudice he faced. Behind the flashing cameras, fight scenes, and larger-than-life presence, Bruce Lee was, at his core, just a man like anyone else. He had routines, struggles, and moments of doubt, but he also had something that set him apart. It was a relentless drive to prove himself in a world that constantly told him he didn't belong. Linda Lee Cadwell remembers the quiet moments that the public never got to see. Bruce was disciplined in everything he did. He started his mornings early with stretching and meditating before diving into intense training. He obsessed over details like his diet, his movements, and even the way he breathed. He believed the body was a weapon that had to be sharpened daily. But beyond the martial artist, he was also a loving husband and father. He would scoop up Brandon, spin him around the living room, and tell him stories about warriors and legends. To Bruce, family was sacred. But while Bruce found peace in his home, the outside world was far from kind. Being Chinese in America in the 1960s and 70s meant facing constant prejudice. Even with his undeniable talent, Bruce struggled to land major roles in Hollywood. Directors and producers dismissed him, telling him he wasn't the right look for an American audience. When he auditioned for the lead role in Kung Fu, a show he had helped inspire, he was told he couldn't be the star.
My last name is Lee, Bruce Lee. I was born in San Francisco in 1940. I'm 24 right now.
The role instead went to another actor, David Carradine. The excuse was that a Chinese lead just wouldn't sell to audiences. This infuriated Bruce because he knew he was better than the people they were casting. He knew he could do more, but in an industry controlled by people who saw him as an outsider, his talent wasn't enough. Instead of giving up, Bruce channeled his frustration into action. He wrote his own scripts, trained celebrities in martial arts, and pushed harder than ever to prove his worth. Linda stood by him through it all. She saw the pain he carried, that frustration of being good enough but never being given the chance. She watched him work himself to exhaustion, refusing to slow down. But Bruce's rise to fame didn't just shake up Hollywood, it made people nervous. He not only proved that an Asian man could be a leading star, but he also confirmed that he was indeed powerful, charismatic, and respected worldwide. And some didn't like that. And Bruce spoke openly about discrimination in the industry. He wanted change, not just for himself, but for others who would follow. He wasn't just teaching martial arts. He was teaching self-worth, strength, and resistance against a system that wanted to keep people in their place. As his influence grew, so did the resistance against him. As Linda would later realize, some forces may not have wanted Bruce's message to spread. And these forces may have played a role in what happened next. But what was happening behind the scenes? What struggles was Bruce facing that the public never saw? The struggles they hid from the public. Today, we remember Bruce Lee as a superstar. With his signature sidekick, he seemed invincible to the world. On set, he broke boards like paper and moved so fast that cameras struggled to keep up. But behind the legend was a man constantly battling forces determined to keep him down. Linda knew how hard it was for Bruce. Even after he had made a name for himself, money was tight. Early in his career, he struggled to provide for his family. Hollywood wasn't throwing money at him, as most of the roles still went to other actors, leaving him to scrape by teaching martial arts. He trained celebrities like Steve McQueen and James Coburn, but even then, it wasn't enough. Some months, they barely made rent. Then came the injuries. The world saw Bruce as an unstoppable warrior, but his body took a beating. In 1970, he suffered a severe back injury while training. It was so bad that doctors told him he might never kick again. For months, he was stuck in bed, unable to move without pain. Linda remembers how it broke him. She saw how the man who lived to fight now had to struggle just to stand. But Bruce refused to accept it. He spent hours reading and filling his notebooks with ideas about martial arts, philosophy, and personal growth. He turned his weakness into strength, but even as Bruce clawed his way back, Hollywood kept the door shut. Studios wanted martial arts, but they didn't want Bruce. Bruce had revolutionized action choreography with his speed and style, and everything about him was electric. Yet executives still claimed an Asian man couldn't carry a film. They wanted a familiar face, that is, a white actor who could be made to look like a martial artist. It was a slap in the face. Linda saw the toll it took on him. He barely slept and kept pushing himself harder each day. He kept training, writing, and calling every connection he had to force the industry to recognize him. And the stress was unbearable. He lost weight and became restless and obsessed. And then there was something else, something that Linda would only speak about years later. Bruce wasn't just fighting for a role. He believed he was fighting against powerful people who didn't want him to succeed. He spoke often about enemies in high places. He would tell Linda that forces were watching him, people who didn't want him changing the industry. At first, she thought he was just frustrated, but as the years went by, she started to wonder if he was right. Despite everything, Bruce never stopped. He kept pushing until he finally got his shot. Hollywood finally came calling when they offered him Enter the Dragon. It was not just a victory, it was a battle won. Enter the Dragon, the film that would make him a global icon. But success came at a cost. The pressure, the sleepless nights, and the constant battles all weighed on him. Just when he was on top of the world, everything fell apart. All these years, Linda knew the truth about Bruce Lee. But at 79, she was finally ready to share what the people had thought for the longest time. But as Linda reflects on Bruce's life, a more complex picture emerges. What drove Bruce Lee to keep pushing, even when the odds were against him? What fueled his passion and determination? The philosophy that drove him. Part of what the world tends to overlook about Bruce Lee was his philosophy. Bruce Lee wasn't just a fighter. He was a force of nature, a man who believed that movement, both physical and mental, was the key to survival. To him, life was a battle, and the only way to win was to flow with it. Take this quote, "Be water, my friend," for example.
I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
People throw it around all the time, but few understand its true meaning. Bruce didn't just say it, he lived it. Water adapts. Water finds a way. When Hollywood shut its doors, he didn't bang on them. He created his own path by becoming a star in Hong Kong. When his body betrayed him, he turned his pain into wisdom. And when enemies lurked in the shadows, he refused to fear them. Linda saw it firsthand. She watched as he trained his mind as much as his body by reading books on philosophy, psychology, and warfare. He had an almost obsessive hunger for knowledge, and he was always scribbling down ideas in his notebooks. These ideas went beyond martial arts. To Bruce, fighting was just a metaphor for life. If you can master your own mind, you can master anything. This mindset shaped everything, even their marriage. Bruce was intense. He loved fiercely, but he also demanded growth not just from himself, but from Linda and everyone around him. He didn't tolerate excuses. If life knocked you down, you got up. If a door slammed in your face, you found another way in. He called it walking on. To Bruce, the past didn't matter. What mattered was the next step. When he injured his back, doctors told him he might never fight again. He didn't accept it. He read, he wrote, he redefined his body and healed himself through sheer willpower. Linda remembered the way he spoke about it, as if giving up had never even been an option. To hell with what they say, I will walk on. But this relentless drive wasn't just about martial arts or movies. Bruce had a bigger vision. He wanted to change the way people thought. He saw martial arts as a path to self-mastery. Martial arts was not just punches and kicks, but a way to break limits. He believed in tearing down barriers and creating something new. And that made him dangerous. Powerful people didn't like disruptors. Hollywood executives weren't just against an Asian lead in movies. They were against him, his ideas, his energy, and his refusal to play by their rules. They saw what he was doing, how his philosophy was catching on, and how people were listening to him. Bruce Lee wasn't just making action films. He was shaping minds, and shaping minds was a very big threat. Linda always wondered if that's why things played out the way they did. If Bruce had stayed quiet and had just been another martial artist, maybe things would have been different. But Bruce Lee was never meant to be silent. And that's why, even decades after his death, the mystery around him still refuses to die. But what was happening behind the scenes in those final days? Linda's memories of Bruce's last moments would reveal a complex and unsettling picture. What Linda remembers about the final days. Bruce Lee was unstoppable until he wasn't. In the days leading up to his death, something was off. Linda saw it. He was still training and pushing himself harder than anyone should, but there were moments when his energy shifted. According to her, he spoke about the future with an urgency that felt different, almost as if time was slipping through his fingers. There were other things, too. She reportedly noticed strange phone calls and hushed conversations that ended the moment she walked into the room. Bruce had always been careful about who he trusted, but in those last weeks he seemed more watchful and more aware of something unseen. And then, on July 20, 1973, everything changed. Bruce was in Betty Ting Pei's apartment that evening. He had complained of a headache and taken a simple painkiller before lying down for a nap. Hours later, he never woke up. Just like that, the strongest man she had ever known was gone. But how? Doctors ruled it cerebral edema, which is a swelling of the brain. They said it was a bad reaction to the medication, just an unfortunate accident. But that explanation never sat right with people. How could a young man in peak physical condition who trained his body like a machine suddenly just drop dead like that? Some claimed it was heat stroke, pointing to the intense Hong Kong summer and the way Bruce had been pushing himself. Others whispered about the curse of the dragon, which is a chilling idea that Bruce had been marked by forces beyond his control. But there were those who believed something much darker. Bruce had enemies. Some Hollywood executives wanted him out. Traditional martial artists who despised his rejection of their rigid styles. There were also powerful figures in Hong Kong who didn't like how much influence he was gaining. Some even claimed the infamous Chinese criminal triads had a hand in his death. But Linda spent decades dismissing these theories. She insisted that Bruce's death was just a tragic medical event. Instead, she focused on raising their children and carried on his legacy the best she could. But now, at 79, she was saying something she never had before. There was something that frightened Bruce in those final days. This was something he never told her outright, but she could sense it in the way he looked at her and in the way his shoulders tensed when he thought she wasn't watching. For years, she had locked away her suspicions and buried them under grief and responsibility. But time has changed things, and Linda sees it as the time to tell the truth. What she revealed about Bruce Lee would change everything. Bruce Lee was not. For decades, the world has known Bruce Lee as a martial arts icon, a fighter, a legend, a man whose speed, strength, and technique seemed almost supernatural. But what if that image wasn't the full truth? What if Bruce Lee was something more? Linda Lee Cadwell, the woman who knew him better than anyone, finally speaks. And what she reveals changes everything. Bruce Lee was not just a fighter. Yes, he trained like a warrior, pushing his body to the edge of human limits. But fighting was never his ultimate goal. His true passion was the mind, in philosophy, growth, and the limitless potential of human beings. His martial arts were just a tool to express that philosophy, a way to show the world that adaptability, resilience, and freedom of movement were the keys to life itself. He devoured books on philosophy, psychology, and spirituality, pulling wisdom from Eastern and Western thought alike. He saw martial arts as a reflection of life's struggles, teaching his students that rigid beliefs would break them, but adaptability would make them unstoppable. His message was dangerous, not to everyday people but to those in power, because Bruce Lee was not just a Hollywood star. He was a revolutionary. He challenged the system and the unspoken rules of race and power in entertainment. Hollywood didn't want an Asian man in the lead. They wanted him as the sidekick, the mystical guru, or the disposable villain. But Bruce refused. He rejected every script that tried to reduce him to a stereotype. He was going to be the lead, and he was going to do it his way. When Hollywood shut its doors, Bruce turned to Hong Kong, where he became bigger than anyone could have imagined. His movies were global sensations, and his presence was undeniable. And that's when things started to change. Linda had never questioned the official story about her husband's death publicly. She had repeated what the doctors said, which was what the world had been told. But now, at 79, she admits that doubts had always lingered. To her, Bruce Lee was not someone who simply died. How does a man in peak physical condition, with no history of illness, just collapse? How does someone with Bruce's knowledge of the human body not recognize signs of danger? And why were there so many conflicting reports? Some say he died at home. Others insist it was at the hospital. And then there was Betty Ting Pei's apartment, the place where his body was found. That part had never sat right with Linda. There was fear in Bruce's eyes in those final days. He had sensed something coming. Was he being followed? Was he warned? Linda doesn't claim to have all the answers, but she acknowledges what so many have suspected for years. Bruce Lee may not have died from an accident. For the first time, she allows the possibility that his death was not natural. She points to the enemies he had made, from the Hollywood executives who wanted him gone, the martial arts traditionalists who saw him as a threat, and the powerful figures in Hong Kong who had other ideas about how the industry should be run. And then, of course, the triads. She believed that Bruce had refused to play by their rules. They had warned him, but he ignored those warnings. And then suddenly, he was gone. Linda didn't name names or point fingers, but she does something she never has before. She acknowledges the possibility that Bruce Lee was silenced, and his death was not what it seemed. And if that's true, then the biggest question remains: who wanted him gone, and why? The legacy he left behind. Bruce Lee is gone, but his presence never faded. If anything, his death made him larger than life. He became more than a martial artist or a film star. He became a symbol, a movement, and a legend that refused to die. Linda Lee Cadwell lost her husband, but she knew she couldn't let the world forget what he stood for. Bruce's philosophy, his belief in self-expression, in breaking barriers, and in defying limits had to live on. So she took on the responsibility of preserving his legacy. Through the Bruce Lee Foundation, Linda worked tirelessly to ensure that Bruce's message remained untwisted and uncorrupted. She collected his writings, his notes, and his teachings, and shared them with the world. She made sure his name was not just associated with flying kicks and action films, but with his mind and wisdom. And yet, even as she fought to keep Bruce's legacy alive, tragedy struck again. It was with her son, Brandon Lee. His death on the set of The Crow was supposed to be an accident, a tragic mishap with a prop gun. But the similarities to his father's fate were impossible to ignore. Another young man, full of promise, faced a sudden, mysterious death, exactly 20 years after his father's death. People whispered, was it truly just a coincidence? Or had Bruce's son inherited not just his talent, but his enemies as well? Linda never publicly entertained the theories, but privately, she couldn't ignore the weight of it. First Bruce, then Brandon. Two deaths that left too many unanswered questions. Still, she refused to let grief bury Bruce's influence. Decades passed, and yet Bruce's philosophies continued to shape the world. Modern martial artists still study Jeet Kune Do, his revolutionary fighting style that defied rigid traditions. Filmmakers still drew inspiration from his cinematic presence, his storytelling, and his vision. Self-improvement gurus still quoted him, "Be water, my friend," and his words became mantras for personal growth and resilience. Bruce Lee had become more than just a man. He was an idea, and ideas, no matter how many people fear them, cannot be killed. But maybe that was the real problem, because even in death, Bruce Lee's influence hadn't stopped. It had grown. It had spread beyond what anyone could have predicted. And if there were people who once wanted him silenced, what must they have thought when they realized that they had only made him immortal? What Bruce would have wanted. At 79, Linda Lee Cadwell knows she won't be around forever. She has spent a lifetime carrying Bruce's story and protecting his legacy. Now, as she reflects on everything, she finally says what fans have long suspected. Bruce was fighting a bigger battle than people realized, she admits. It was never just about martial arts or just about movies. Bruce Lee was challenging a system that didn't want to be changed. He believed in breaking barriers, not just in fighting, but in thinking. He saw the world differently, and that made him powerful. But power like that attracts the wrong kind of attention. Linda won't outright say it, but the message is clear. Bruce's influence made him enemies. And while she doesn't name names, she confirms what many have felt for years. His death was not as simple as it seemed. But if Bruce were here, Linda believes he wouldn't want people to focus on his death. He would want them to focus on his message, his philosophy, and the idea that limits exist only in the mind. That adaptability is strength. That true power is in knowing oneself. Be water, he always said. And even after all these years, Bruce Lee still flows through the world, shaping it in ways no one could have predicted. Even if some once wanted him gone, they failed. Because Bruce Lee is still here. What do you think about Linda Lee's statements? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.